Hello! Sudan's civil war is one of the most prolonged and terrible conflicts in Africa. During the First and Second Wars, millions of people were killed and more civilians were displaced. After a half a century, the wars resulted in South Sudan's independence in 2011. However, internal conflicts and violence continue. Why were these wars so chaotic? How come the independence ended up another war in South Sudan? To find the answers, we should carefully look into the multifaceted nature of the conflict. Because of its complexity, people would give up thorough examination and just accept a simplified notion that the wars were a confrontation between northern Muslims and southern Christians and animists. Let me explain the root causes of these wars with three keywords: internal colonialism, disunity in the south, and oil. Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, is located at the confluence of the White and Blue Nile rivers. From here, the Nile River runs down to Egypt, but historically, power and culture have cascaded down in the opposite direction. Sudan inland was a peripheral region to the civilizations in Egypt and the Mediterranean from ancient times. The southern part of Sudan, broadly now South Sudan, was an additional periphery to the north. The exploitative relations between the center and the edge had gradually developed since the 16th century, when the northerners began to identify themselves Muslims and Arabs. The Turco-Egyptian conquest in 1821 precipitated the division between north and south. The Ottoman regime coerced the northerners to raid southern regions for loot and slaves by imposing heavy taxes on Sudan. In 1883, the Mahdi religious nationalists temporarily recovered Sudanese sovereignty, but they were unable to govern the southern area and unwilling to embrace non-believers. The Anglo-Egyptian forces took control of Sudan, and Britain set the country's borderlines in 1903, including southern regions. But they kept taking coercive measures in the south without building proper civil administration and development. During this condominium period, the southern areas lagged far behind in economy, education, and development. Sudan gained independence in 1956, but the colonial structure between north and south remained intact. While Britain and Egypt competed to retain their influence in Sudan by negotiating with northern nationalists, the voice of southerners was neglected. Even when a mutiny in Equatoria occurred in 1955, Britain refused to reassert authority in the south to prevent Egypt from engaging in the matter. Now, only northerners had the sole power to decide the future of independent Sudan. From this point, the vicious pattern began. While the northern regime aimed to establish an Islamic state and maintain its dominance over the south, the southerners wanted a secular state and self-determination. The north neglected the southerners' aspirations by circumventing democratic procedures and repressing them violently. Then southern rebel groups began to rise in the bush or exile. As warfare continued mainly in the south, civilians had to suffer from violence and displacement. The first war was the confrontation between the Sudanese government and southern guerrillas band nicknamed Anyanya, which means snake poison. In 1972, the Addis Ababa Agreement ended the war, but it could not resolve the internal colonialism, only establishing the southern regional government without authority to legislate or initiate economic development. Under President Nimari, mutinies occurred again, and autonomy in the south was abolished. In 1953, coercive application of Sharia Islamic law over the south sparked the Second Civil War. This time, southern rebel groups had organized themselves better through John Garang's SPLA. A group of military officers ousted President Nimari in 1955, and Sadiq al-Mahdi formed a coalition government in Sudan. Prime Minister Sadiq and rebel leader Garang agreed to meet for a peace plan in 1989, but Omar al-Bashir's coup nullified the deal. During the Second War, the conflict spread over other marginalized areas such as Nuba Mountain, Blue Nile, and Darfur. Under the post-September 11 circumstance, the international community's effort better facilitated or pushed hardly a peace process. The government of Sudan and the rebels finally reached the comprehensive peace agreement in 2005. After a half-century struggle, the South got a chance to overcome the internal colonial structure. In the 2011 referendum, Southern Sudanese overwhelmingly voted for independence and establishing a secular state. For the central government, only two situations would bring them to the negotiation table for peace: when Southern forces are strong enough, or the international community puts hardly pressure on them. Historically, the South has never formed any single entity in politics, religions, or ethnicity. There were just peoples with different identities and interests living scattered around the region. The absence of social unity made them fragile and ineffective during the wars. One example is the split in SPLA. In 1991, Riek Machar led the coup of the Nuer faction in SPLA. Then John Garang's SPLA had to fight on two front lines. Khartoum took advantage of these fragmentations by arming Nuer groups. Besides the conflicts between Dinka and Nuer, two major peoples in the south, internal wars among Nuer groups followed. All these internal fragmentations would only aggravate the painful situation of southern civilians. Petroleum exploration began around 1970. Oil pipeline was built over the northern region, extending 1,600 kilometers to the port on the Red Sea. When Sudan exported the first crude oil in 1999, the government earned $2.2 million in one shot. Khartoum spent much of its profit on purchasing military hardware and maintaining secret police. The problem here is that oil fields are in the north-south border regions, where southern peoples had lived. The government violently displaced the inhabitants by arming local groups such as the Bagara horse-backed militias and breakaway Nuer factions of SPLA. To take control of oil fields, fighting between the government and the rebels continued. Later, some pro-government factions challenged the oil control of Indian regions and finally rejoined SPLA before the peace agreement in 2005. According to the CPA, the South had 6 years of autonomy, and an independent referendum took place in January 2011. In July the same year, the South became the Republic of South Sudan, the 193rd member of the United Nations. Both sides agreed to share income from oil fields evenly. Unfortunately, after all the struggle for peace, South Sudan failed to overcome disunity, and the civil war occurred in 2013. I hope to talk about it more in other videos. Thank you for watching.